Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for an overview of the SBA and the University of Minnesota Business Law Insurance for Small Business. I am Don Jackson, an Economic Development Specialist in the Minnesota District Office of the Small Business Administration. During the presentation, we ask that all attendees have their audio and video muted. We also ask that you type any questions into the chat bubble and the control panel at the bottom right side of the screen. For those of you who are having problems accessing the Microsoft Teams link, we will be announcing slide transition so you can follow along with the slide deck that was previously provided to you. I would like to introduce Emily Buchholz, the Executive Director for the Business Law Clinic, University of Minnesota Law School. Emily?
Hi, thanks, Mike. Well, welcome everyone to the call. We're really excited to see that so many of you have joined us this morning. As Mike mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Corporate Institute at the University of Minnesota Law School, which is kind of a mouthful, but the biggest piece of what I do there is running the Business Law Clinic. And in our clinic, we provide pro bono, that is no cost legal services to small businesses. We run that clinic in the fall and in the spring with a new cohort of students and clients each time. And prior to working for the University of Minnesota Law School, I was an attorney, a partner in private practice, working for many years with small businesses. So this kind of space, small business legal issues, is kind of near and dear to my heart. And I know that it's, lawyers always say this kind of thing, but I feel the need to kind of bookend the conversation to frame it by saying, this is general legal information, which is really helpful. This is where most folks start when they're trying to figure out kind of what comes next. But it's not the same thing as specific legal advice that would be kind of particular to your situation. So to the extent that you have questions about something that's happening for you specifically, it's important at some point to get connected with an attorney who can do that work of sort of assessing your particular situation and providing guidance. So as Mike mentioned, you can put the questions in the chat bar. I'm going to go ahead and monitor that, respond to some of them via chat if I can, or find a good moment to pause the presentation so we can address them. But the bulk of all questions will be saved until the end, where we'll just kind of have a question and answer period. So with those kind of logistics, I'd like to introduce Professor Daniel Schwarcz, who is the Fredrickson Byron Professor of Law at the University of Minnesota Law School. Professor Schwarcz teaches many different courses. Pretty much all of them are under the business and corporate umbrella, but his specialty is insurance law. So we're really excited to have him with us today. In addition to being a national expert on insurance law issues, he has received multiple teaching awards at the law school. So we're extra excited to have him with us today. We also have attorney Peter Doely, who's a University of Minnesota alum. He's one of the adjunct professors at the law school for our insurance law clinic. And he's also an attorney at Maslon LLP. We are extra excited to have Peter with us today because at Maslon, they have a pro bono initiative working with small businesses and insurance issues, especially after the recent riots in Minneapolis. So we're really excited to have his thoughts and voice as well. The presentation itself will be was prepared and will be given by two excellent students from the University of Minnesota Law School. We have with us today Ian Sadler and Sam Logterman, who are both third-year students. That's their final year of law school. And they recently took Professor Schwartz's insurance law class. Ian is actually working for Professor Schwarcz this summer, and Sam is at a local law firm. So we're really thrilled that they were gracious enough to volunteer their time and efforts to be with us this morning. Without further ado, Sam and Ian, I will turn it over to you to talk a little bit about insurance considerations.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. As Emily said, my name is Sam Logterman, and this is Ian Sadler, and we're two students at the University of Minnesota Law School. So what we have done today for all of you is we've just put together a very brief presentation on the insurance claims process and some of the considerations to take into account when you are filing claims as a result of the recent civil unrest in St. Paul and Minneapolis. So Don, if you could go to the next slide. So what we've done today is we have tried to keep the presentation as simple as possible, and that involved putting it into sort of a step-by-step method as to what you should consider when filing your insurance claims. So step one would be to first determine whether or not you are insured. Step two would be to contact your insurer to report your claim. Step three would be to document your damage. Step four is to meet with your adjuster. Step five is to continue the claims process through to its resolution. And finally, step six is to hopefully reach a settlement with your insurer so you can get reimbursed for the damage that you've suffered as a result of the civil unrest. Next slide, please. A quick word before we jump into this. Emily already sort of mentioned it, but most of the information we're going to give you today is going to be applicable to most, if not all, insurance policies, but it's still not a substitute for your actual policy. Your insurance policy is a contract between you, the insured, and your insurer, and it's what's going to govern your interactions throughout the claims process. So we obviously encourage you to check your own policy, understand what's in it, and sort of understand to the best of your ability how it's going to affect you in your interactions with your insurer throughout this whole process you're about to embark on. Next slide, please. So obviously, the first step is to determine whether or not you're insured. Hopefully for most of you, this is a pretty straightforward question. If you've been paying those insurance premiums every month, it should be a pretty easy yes. But there might be some of you out there that are not sure as to whether or not you're insured, or might even think that you're uninsured and might actually be insured. So if that sounds like it's your situation, there are a couple steps that we would encourage you to take. First of all, if you are financing your business in any particular way, whether that be through a mortgage or maybe a loan that you took out to finance some of your inventory, we would encourage you to reach out to your lender or look at your lending agreement and try to figure out whether or not your lender made insurance a prerequisite for the loan. Many banks and many lenders require some sort of insurance on the thing that you're using the loan to fund. So if you have done any sort of this sort of financing for your business, you may be insured and you might not even realize it. So again, if this sounds like you, reach out to your lender, see if this is the situation you're in, and you might be able to take advantage of that insurance. The second thing that we would encourage you to do is if you're a tenant, we would encourage you to reach out to your landlord. Many landlords have some sort of commercial property insurance policy on the buildings that they own. And as a tenant, you may be partially covered under that property. While it's unlikely that it's going to cover the entirety of your losses, you may be able to pick up some recovery around the edges. For example, say you're running a restaurant and you have used your own money to buy some new stoves to make improvements to the building. You might be able to get some sort of recovery for those improvements under your landlord's commercial property insurance policy. And then finally, just as a logistics issue, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but if you know you have a policy, but you can't find the actual policy, just ask your insurance agent or your insurer for it when you call in to report the claim, and they're going to be able to help you find the actual physical, or I guess in this case, digital as well, language of your policy. Next slide, please. So if you take all these steps and you come to the conclusion that you aren't insured, there are potentially some steps you can still take. The first one will be to find other sources of funding. We have seen crowdsourcing like GoFundMe's be fairly successful for some businesses around the country. They might not cover the entirety of your loss, but every bit counts. And anything you can do to sort of offset some of the property damage that you've suffered is going to help you in restarting your business. Another possibility that isn't necessarily a possibility now, but might be a possibility in the future, are grants and loans from the local, state, or federal levels of government. The best information that we can give you right now for this is that there are some bills that have been proposed by the Minnesota State Legislature that would allocate a pretty significant amount of money to help businesses recover from damage suffered during the civil unrest. But all of these are still just proposed bills. None of them have been codified into law yet. So it's sort of hard to give you any firm advice either way on how to take advantage of this option. The best advice that we can give is if you're a business owner, keep checking in with your elected officials, keep checking in with the either Minnesota or St. Paul local government, depending on where your business is located, and then keep checking in with the Department of Commerce at the state level. All of this stuff is very fluid. It changes week to week. So keep on checking in. If you don't get a good answer one week, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the same answer if you call back at the same time next week. So be persistent. Our local leaders are aware that this is an issue, and hopefully they will have some sort of solution in the near future. And then if neither of those options work, there are alternative business processes that you can utilize. Obviously, you can always try to negotiate settlements with vendors, with landlords, with any other parties that are necessary for the operation of your business. And then if nothing else works, you can always look into bankruptcy or business dissolution. Next slide, please. So once you figured out you are insured, typically insurance policies are going to cover two types of damage. Those types of damage are property damage and business interruption damage, and we'll get into both of those right now. Next slide, please. So property damage is sort of the more simple of the two. It is going to cover any sort of physical damage that your business suffers. This is going to include damage to the physical building itself. If your building has suffered any damage, if your building has burned down or has been destroyed, that's all going to be covered under property damage. It's also going to cover any sort of, items within your business. So any sort of inventory that might have been damaged or stolen, as well as any sort of furniture or any sort of technology that you need to operate your business, maybe computers, maybe stuff like that. The one thing that we would tell you pertaining to property damage is, again, make sure to look at your own policy. Some policies might cover things like windows differently from other property within your business. So if that is the case with you, you're going to want to make sure you know that going into discussions with your insurer, so nothing takes you by surprise. And then finally, most policies will cover the replacement cost of the property that's been damaged. So how much is it going to cost to replace that inventory? How much is it going to cost to repair your building? That sort of thing. That's how they're going to calculate the damage and what sort of recovery you can expect. Next slide, please. So the second type of damage that's going to be covered, and it's a little bit more complicated than property damage, is business interruption damage. So business interruption damage basically covers any sort of loss of income or any sort of extra expenses you may have to incur as a result of being shut down by the civil unrest. So let's just dissect that a little bit. So first of all, you have to sort of be shut down or have some sort of business interruption for this business interruption coverage to trigger. What does that mean? The typical thing that we're probably going to see is businesses are going to have to shut down due to direct damage to their business, right? So if your business burns down, if your interior of your business is so badly damaged that you can no longer operate, that's going to count as a shutdown for business interruption insurance. However, there is a less likely scenario, but still possible, that could also trigger business interruption insurance. This scenario is if you actually don't have any damage, but an act of the city has forced you to close your business or has forced you to lose income, something to that effect. So an example of this might be, say, in kind of the early days of the civil unrest, the police shut down a stretch of street in Minneapolis or St. Paul. Your business was located on that street, and as a result of this civic authority, this action of the city, you weren't able to get customers and you weren't able to make any money those days. That might be something that business interruption insurance would also cover. So moving on to coverage, we have said that lost income is covered and extra expenses incurred are covered. The lost income part of that should be fairly straightforward, right? If you're making $500 a week running your business and your business is shut down because of either of the scenarios I've just mentioned, and you can no longer make that $500 a week, that's something that business interruption insurance is going to cover. However, there might also be extra expenses that you have to incur that business interruption insurance would also cover. So say maybe instead of completely shutting down your business, you move to an alternative location instead to operate your business out of that alternative location while you're waiting for your original location to be repaired. Those extra expenses associated with operating out of that alternative location might be something that this business interruption insurance would cover. Now, the one caveat that we have to mention with this particular situation and business interruption insurance is the fact that many businesses were already shut down because of COVID before this civil unrest happened. So the problem that might happen because of this is an insurer might come up to you and say, well, your business was already shut down before this civil unrest because of COVID, so we don't really need to reimburse you for any lost income because you were going to be shut down anyways, right? So what we would suggest doing to sort of, nip this problem in the bud is to look for any sort of documentation that you might have that would, one, prove that you were open before this civil unrest happened, or two, prove that you had some sort of plan to reopen that was put on hold because the civil unrest occurred. So say you were forced to shut down from June 1st to June 15th because of the civil unrest, because of the civil unrest, but before the civil unrest, you had planned to open on June 7th, you would want to give your insurer some sort of documentation proving that, and then your insurer would be able to give you that business interruption insurance from the 7th to the 15th. Next slide, please. Now, when you're looking at your policy, when you're looking at the business interruption provision, you're probably going to see something called the period of restoration. So what the period of restoration is it's basically fancy insurance speak for the period of time that it's going to take you to sort of get your business back on your feet and get your business running again. And it's in this period of time that your insurer is going to reimburse you for that business interruption. They're going to reimburse you for those lost profits. And generally, the way that insurers will calculate this period of restoration is they're going to start the clock within a few days of you taking that damage that causes you to shut down, and they're going to cut it off when your business should have been repaired or when you resume business at a new location. So you might be looking at that and think, okay, when my business should have been repaired, how are we going to, how do you figure that out? That seems very subjective. And you would be right, but it is a conversation that sort of happens between you and your insurer, and you're going to discuss what sort of looks like a reasonable timeline to reopen, and when you can cut off that business interruption insurance. So that's sort of how you're going to figure out how long the period of restoration is going to be. Next slide, please.
Sam, let me just jump in here real quick. We have a couple of great questions. And I also want to check in with Professor Schwarcz and with Mr. Doely to see if they have anything else to add. So one of the questions that has come up a lot, including here today, is whether or not claims for business interruption due to COVID-19 are covered. And then sort of a similar question has to do with just sort of shutdowns due to state action. So if you're thinking about executive orders, et cetera. And I actually want to turn that question to Professor Schwarcz, if you're willing to take that one, Dan, because I know you and I had talked about it before.
Sure. So let me start by saying that this is a complicated issue, but in general, if you make a claim for your business being shut down due to the pandemic or due to a shutdown order related to the pandemic, you can be pretty sure that your insurer is going to deny coverage. Right now, insurers have relatively uniformly taken the view that that's not covered. And the reason for that is, as Sam's presentation has sort of made clear, usually business interruption insurance is related to the cessation of your business due to physical property damage. And so, for instance, in the context of the riots, right, if your business is shut down because it suffered some physical damage, that clearly would be covered ordinarily by business interruption insurance. Insurers have argued that, in general, the pandemic did not result in physical property damage. Okay, and so the reason that businesses were shut down wasn't due to the fact that any physical premises were damaged. It was simply due to the fact that there was the risk of a communicable disease. Also, many policies actually have a specific exclusion that relates to viruses. So in general, you can be pretty sure your insurer is going to deny coverage. Now, where it gets more complicated is that many lawyers have been suing insurers and have been claiming that there is coverage in this scenario. And the basic idea here, there are different types of lawsuits. They generally are a lot stronger when there's not a virus exclusion, a specific virus exclusion. So I would say that for those of you who want to make a claim and who don't have a specific virus exclusion but do have business interruption insurance, it very well may be worth at least making a claim with the expectation that it will be denied, and then at least monitoring some of these lawsuits, or even thinking about getting involved in one of these lawsuits, especially if you find a lawyer willing to take it on a contingency fee basis, where you wouldn't have to actually pay any fees, or a pro bono basis. It's dangerous to make predictions about how likely these lawsuits are to prevail, but I will say that you should think about it as an uphill battle, I guess I would say. And different facts are going to matter. For instance, it might matter if the reason that your business was shut down was because there was actually someone on the premises, an employee or a customer who had COVID-19. Because there are arguments that the physical presence of the virus can constitute property damage. So facts might matter, but in general, the way you should think about this is, one, probably your insurer is going to deny a claim. Two, to the extent you don't have a specific virus exclusion in your policy, it may be worth making a claim and then monitoring the situation and potentially becoming involved in a lawsuit. But that's sort of the basic overview of what's there. And unfortunately, it's not a great scenario for those who are seeking coverage.
Would you say that analysis changes at all if you were to frame it as a question of, an executive order forced you to shut down, whether or not you wanted to go ahead and continue to operate?
A lot of the same issues are going to apply. First, it's very so that raises a distinct set of legal issues that, again, are currently being litigated. Insurers are currently, to my knowledge, all denying these claims. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take the trouble to make a claim, and it doesn't mean that you shouldn't potentially think about litigation in that scenario. But the difficulty is this relates to the business interruption policy. Usually has two components. It has the sort of basic business interruption coverage, and then it has what's called a civil authority coverage. And the civil authority coverage applies if there is a government entity that forces a shutdown, as was the case. But if you look at the policy language, and you should take a look at it, for the civil authority coverage, what's usually required is that the civil authority acts due to physical loss or damage. And so, in a sense, the issues replicate themselves regarding whether or not the shutdown orders related to the pandemic were because of physical loss or damage, or whether they were instead because of something else, like preventing the transmission of a respiratory disease from person-to-person transmission. So again, I would say that much is going to depend on individual circumstances and individual policy language in terms of the prospects for litigation. But in general, you should not have an expectation your insurer is going to pay this, just because insurers have pretty uniformly taken the initial view that they're not going to. Whether or not the claim is because you shut down because there was a specific risk of coronavirus, or you shut down because the state made you shut down. In either case, insurers are saying, and not without any cause, that there was no direct physical loss or damage to your property, and hence the resulting business interruption losses are not covered. So again, it's worth making a claim, particularly if you don't have a virus exclusion under either of these coverages, the general business interruption coverage or the civil authority coverage. But at the same time, you should be cognizant that you're probably going to get denied coverage, and that recovery would then probably require involving yourself in a lawsuit, either now or in the future if these lawsuits if there are favorable outcomes for policyholders in these lawsuits, which right now we just don't know if they're all sort of in the preliminary stages.
Thank you. Thanks very much. All right, Sam and Ian, we'll let you go ahead and continue.
Awesome. So now we are to step 2. We have determined that we have insurance coverage. So now what do we need to do? The first step is to call your insurance agent. And if you don't have an insurance agent, you want to call your insurance company to make your claim. If you don't know the number to call, a lot of times you can go to your insurer's website and they will have a number to file your claim. And we cannot stress this enough. If you have not done this already, do so as soon as possible. Insurers sort of like to view the damage as quickly as possible, and they kind of like to see it in the way that it looked when the damage was, initially caused. So the earlier you let them know about your claim, the easier it's going to be for you to sort of get through the claims process as quickly as possible and with as few hurdles as possible. And just a logistics thing, when you do call your insurer to make a claim, it might help you to ask when you can expect an adjuster to visit the property. So what an adjuster is going to do is he is going to come to your business or whatever's been damaged. He's going to view it. He's going to kind of make an inspection and get the information that he needs to get. So knowing when to expect him is just going to sort of allow you to, better plan your schedule and sort of figure out how much time you have to do some of the things that we're going to tell you to do on these next couple slides. Just as another logistics issue, some insurance policies may require you to report to the police if you think a crime has been committed or get a police report, something to that effect. So what we have done here is we've added the web links for both the St. Paul and Minneapolis Records Department, if that is something that your insurer would like you to do. Next slide, please. So after you have called your insurer, you've confirmed that an adjuster is going to come out, you know what time you expect him or her, you want to try to find a copy of your policy. I know we've said it a lot, but sort of knowing what's in your policy and kind of having a grasp of what's covered and what might not be covered is just going to help you be able to more intelligently interact with your insurer throughout this whole process. And again, hopefully make things go as smoothly as possible. We've mentioned it before, but if you don't have a physical copy, normally you can go onto your insurer's website, you use your account info to log into your account, and usually somewhere in your account you can find a digital copy of your insurance policy. Again, if that doesn't work for you, if you're not able to get into your account for whatever reason, just ask your insurer or your insurance agent to get you a copy when you have called them on the phone to report your claim. They will be happy to do so. And then finally, after you have sort of set up your adjuster appointment, you have found a copy of your policy, you're going to want to start compiling documentation to sort of prove the amount of damage that's been done to your business. And kind of going back to the business interruption insurance briefly, some of these documents might be, proof that you had been open before this civil unrest occurred, or proof that you had plans to open but were put on hold because of the civil unrest. Another great document to find would be previous business tax filings from prior years. That'll help prove sort of the value of some of your damaged property and will help the insured to more easily make that determination. Next slide, please. And then step 3 is to document the damage. So I mentioned it very briefly earlier, but when an adjuster comes, they sort of like to see the damage as close to what it looked like when it first occurred, right? So if you can avoid throwing anything out, that would be preferable. When the adjuster gets there, he or she will sort of inspect the scene and tell you what can and can't go. That being said, you don't need to leave everything exactly as is. If you need to take some steps to prevent further damage from occurring, please feel free to do that. Your insurer will hopefully help you reimburse your damage, but they also don't want more damage occurring as you're sort of going through the claims process. So in this scenario, that'll probably take the form of boarding up your windows. If they're not broken already, they don't get broken in the future. Or maybe if your roof has become leaky as a result of some damage, you get a tarp to put it over your roof to prevent water damage. That sort of thing, just little improvements around the edges that will prevent more damage from occurring. We should note that if you do decide to do this, and this is sort of just a great piece of advice in general, keep all of your receipts. Some insurance policies will reimburse you for these steps that you take to prevent further damage. And if your insurance policy is one of those policies, you are going to want to have your receipts to prove, yes, I did go out and buy these boards. Yes, I did go out and buy this tarp. Again, just little things to make it easier for your insurer to say, okay, yes, we owe Sam this much money for boarding up his windows. And then finally, you're going to want to try to document everything with photo evidence. Photo evidence, take as much photos as possible. Obviously, as we've said, if you can leave stuff as is until the adjuster gets there, that's great, but you're still going to want to take as much photos as possible. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Maybe, you're leaving things as is, but a family member or an employee comes into the business, they decide to be a good Samaritan, I'm going to clean some stuff up. And your business is cleaned up before the adjuster got there. Well, now you have photos that you can show the adjuster. And even after stuff has been cleaned up, you're going to sort of want to memorialize what the damage looked like in case you have to go back in the future and look at what the damage looked like. So again, photos are going to help you do that. Next slide, please. And then finally, in regards to documenting damage, a question that we've gotten is, what if my adjuster is taking too long to visit my business? We're very much aware that there's a tension sort of present here, right? We're telling you to leave everything as is, wait for the adjuster to get there. But on the other hand, we're sure you sort of want to get back on your feet and start taking steps to getting your business running again, right? That's the whole point of this process. So our advice would be, one, you can take some of the steps that we gave you in the last slide, make small improvements to prevent further damage. But other things you can do is you can start researching some of the information that you'll need to start making those, permanent repairs to your business. So for example, what sort of contractors are available? How much will they cost? How much time will it take to complete those repairs? You can also look for quotes on replacing your furniture, your computers, your inventory, stuff like that. All of this information is going to be needed eventually at some point in the claims process. So if you're doing that on your own, if you're going out and doing the research, that's only going to put you further ahead in the claims process and will hopefully get you to settlement quicker than you would have been otherwise. Next slide, please.
All right, so thank you, Sam. So what we're doing here is we've done all the steps that Sam's told us to do, and now we finally get to meet with our adjuster. So what should you do once your adjuster arrives? The first thing that you should do is ask them for a business card or some other form of identification just to verify that they represent your insurer and that they are in fact your adjuster and they're there to see your property. You can never be too careful. After that, your adjuster is going to want to view all of the damage to your business, everything around the property. So your job is just to do your best to facilitate that process, let them in anywhere that they need to be, answer any questions that they might have while they're out on the property. Just do your best to make their job easy. After that, once your adjuster is done looking through your property, you should ask them what you should do next, as well as what the insurer is going to do next, so what the next steps are in the claims process. You've got face-to-face time with a representative of your insurance company. You should take advantage of it and make sure that you're all on the same page as to what the next step is going to be. In that same vein, you should ask for an estimate of how long the adjuster expects the process to last, whether that be the claims process to getting your settlement to rebuilding your business and getting back into business. Could I get the next slide, please? So on the same vein of meeting with your adjuster, some people have asked, should you hire a public adjuster? And if you've ever talked to a lawyer, the answer to every question is, it depends. And this one's no different, it depends. So should you hire a public adjuster? Public adjusters can be a valuable tool that give you a second opinion on the value of your property and assessing the damage, and they may be able to get you a larger insurance settlement. But that needs to be balanced with the fact that the public adjuster will charge you a fee. So if you don't think that the value of the settlement that the public adjuster can get you will offset the fee that you'll pay them, then it may not be beneficial to hire them. If you do decide to hire a public adjuster, before you do, you need to make sure that they're licensed by the Minnesota Department of Commerce. You can do that by calling the Consumer Services Center at the number we have listed here. You can also check to make sure that they don't have very many complaints filed against them make sure that there's someone that's reputable and that you want to be working with. After you do that, you need to make sure to get a written contract that clearly defines all of the fees that you'll be paying the public adjuster. We just want to make sure that you're as safe and as protected as possible in this, and that the public adjuster does what you ask them to do and nothing else. Next slide, please. Building off of with public adjusters, we need to avoid any public adjuster who claims to be from a government agency, who insists that their services are mandatory, who uses high pressure sales tactics, or who refuses to provide a written contract. The reason for this is we don't want you to get scammed by people that act like they're trying to help you, but are actually trying to take advantage of you. So if a public adjuster is doing any of these things, we just need to make sure that we avoid them and move on to somebody else who is doing all of the things that we've already talked about. Next slide, please. That's going to bring us into step 5, which is continuing the claims process. So here's just a few little tips and tricks that can help you with the claims process. After you contact your agent, you just want to make sure to keep your policy and claims number handy. They're going to ask you for either your policy number or your claims number pretty much anytime you're on the phone or talking to anyone that's with the insurance company. And it'll just make it easier if you have those numbers handy. While you are having these conversations with your insurance company, you're going to want to take a lot of notes. You're going to keep a log of who you spoke to and when, as well as a summary of your conversations. This is just so you have the information that you need in case a conflict arises down the road. You know who told you what and when. That's valuable information to have. And a way to avoid these conflicts is we should try to come to an agreement with your insurer as to how repairs will proceed. If your insurer is going to provide an estimate for repairs from a contractor that they work with, it might be in your best interest to get an estimate from an independent contractor to verify that your insurer is giving you accurate numbers of both the time it's going to take to get your business back up and running, and of course the money that it's going to take to get your business back up and running. So doing this and getting an estimate from an independent contractor could help you get the settlement that you need to get back up and running. Also, you are not required to use your insurer's preferred contractor, but if you're going to go with somebody else, you should make sure to notify them upfront so you're on the same page. It'll help you avoid any disputes that you could possibly have down the road if you're on the same page before repairs start to happen. Next slide, please. So just a few other tricks and tips for continuing with the claims process. If you don't already have a business inventory or an inventory of what was lost and damaged during the period of civil unrest, you should make one. And if you don't have documentation of your inventory or a physical document that tells you what was in the store or in your business at the time, you should do your best to make one from memory. This can help assessing the damage go a little bit more quickly if you have some sort of an inventory that can show the insurer what was in your business at the time of the loss. And another tip is just to do your best to help the adjuster with any requests for documents or anything else that they may need during this entire process. It can be really helpful if you just make the adjuster's job as easy as possible and find any documents and answer any questions that they possibly have. Doing this is going to help make the claims process go faster, which will eventually get you to your settlement more quickly, which is really what we want to do, is get you back into business as soon as possible. Next slide, please.
Say, Ian, can we pause here for just a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. I'd like to just check in. Peter, any thoughts that you have? I know we're covering lots of material. I just wanted to make sure we had a chance to hear from you.
Sure. And I do have, we're obviously throwing a lot of material at you right now. Sam and Ian are doing a great job of covering a lot of ground. I want to circle back on just a few kind of practical tips for approaching some of the situations. I know that accessing insurance money is not an intuitive process for a lot of people. I'd say myself included in my personal capacity, even though in my professional capacity, I do this every day. So I just want to make a couple notes. The first is we talked about the insurance policy quite a bit. And I know when I get my insurance policy, the thing that really matters to me is the first 2 or 3 pages where it shows your deductible amounts, how much you're insured for, what the property is that's insured. Those first couple pages are not the whole policy. The policy usually goes over 100 pages. It'll have the first couple pages that have that really pertinent information that's customized to you. And then there'll be the actual insuring agreement, which maybe goes 10, 15 pages, and then a whole host of document or exclusions or riders that are going to change the policy. So just when you're looking through your documents, when you're contacting your insurance company, make sure you have something that's really thick, that has lots of details, so that will fully lay out what your rights and obligations are. Another thing I want to briefly mention here is that we are primarily focusing on property, commercial property insurance here, and business interruption insurance, which is related. But there are, usually businesses have a whole suite of insurance coverage, commercial general liability insurance coverage, auto, some other coverages like that. So if we're not talking about coverage that you're going to get right here for particular losses, it may not be that you don't have coverage for that. It may just be that this is the most likely source of coverage for the damage that has happened recently in the Twin Cities. So don't give up there. Contact your insurance agent and talk to them about it. You may very well have that. A quick note for Professor Schwartz's, his very astute observations about the likelihood of getting coverage for coronavirus and associated executive orders. I know a couple of times he mentioned that a virus exclusion, which is something that our firm has taken a close look at, and we agree with his assessment of an like response. But we will say that businesses in the restaurant industry, at least in our experience, have had the virus exclusion less. So if that is your particular type of business, we would encourage you to look at that policy. And though we would not say that the insurer is going to pay up, we would say that it is more likely that in the long run, you might be able to get some coverage there. And then a couple other just practical tips. I know that Ian and Sam have been great about the information that you're going to need to gather for your insurer. And the more work you can do for them and the more you can lead them to water, the better. Because we're all human, and adjusters, they do their job, but they're not your representative. They're the insurance company's representative. So they are going to do what they can with the information they're given, and the more you can give to them in a nice clean package that shows all the costs, the better. So we would encourage you to make a spreadsheet, get those, basically 3 buckets with the insurance coverage that we're talking about here. Inventory lists, various furniture, property that was actually damaged. Keep lists of how much you incurred, what you had there, what your actual losses were. Then steps that you took to preserve the property, putting up the tarps, you get, costs $10.99 from Menards, put that in a spreadsheet. If you can give it to them in a spreadsheet, that's really great. And then for the business interruption, which with all the orders are the executive orders and various interruptions to our economy they'll be difficult. But showing business plans to reopen, revenue projections for the near future, all that stuff is going to be really important. And then just one more quick note is with the public adjuster. I know what we've done in a lot of situations, because you're expecting that the insurer is going to work with their preferred contractor. The preferred contractor has or the adjuster, they have a financial incentive to make the insurer happy, and you may get a lower estimate than you would be happy with. Instead of bringing in a public adjuster, you could just bring in the contractor. Contractors obviously will have an incentive to give you a little bit higher bid too. That's certainly what the insurance companies would say. But they have an incentive to be there and may be able to give you some information and feedback for free hoping to get that work from you. And then you would be armed with some numbers that are different that you go back to the insurance company with and say, this is how much it's going to cost me. So those are just some bells and whistles here and there for the good substance that Sam and Ian are giving you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that information. Ian, I'm going to turn it back to you to continue on with the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. That's all great information. So thank you for sharing it. Just moving on, these are some questions or potential conflicts that might come up with your insurer. So the first one we have here is, what if my insurer denies my claims based on a terrorism exclusion? You should know that we don't think this is very likely to happen. There are some people out there that are calling the civil unrest acts of domestic terror. So if your insurer does try to deny your claim based on the terrorism exclusion, what you should do is contact the Department of Commerce, report that insurer for bad faith, and then also tell your insurer that you've done that. Hopefully they'll back off of denying your claim based on this terrorism exclusion after you've reported them for bad faith. If they still don't back off of this claim, then you're going to want to seek legal help with one of the resources that we have listed at the end of the PowerPoint. They'll be able to help you because, again, we do not think that insurers should be denying your claim based on the terrorism exclusion. If they do, that's when you'll need to get help. Next slide, please. So another question that might come up is, what if my insurer denies my claim because I didn't report my loss quickly enough? And it is true that insurers can deny late claims if they were made late, but they can only do that if the fact that your late notice prejudices them in some way. That the classic example of that is, there's damage to the property and then it's cleaned up, there's not much evidence of the damage left, and then you file your claim, the insurer gets out there and there's nothing for them to go with. They don't know what happened. So if you follow the steps that Sam and I have given you so far, you try to preserve things how they are as best you can, you take pictures, you document that, then you should be able to avoid this problem. And if you can contact your insurer as quickly as possible, you'll definitely avoid this problem. But if this still happens to you, which we don't think it should, you're just going to continue to document all of your interactions with the insurer. You're going to keep your log of who you're talking to and when and what they're telling you. And you're going to, preserve the damage to the best of your ability, take pictures, do the things that Sam told you that you can do. And then, again, you should probably seek help with one of the resources that we have listed at the end of the PowerPoint. Next slide, please. So another question is what if my insurer denies my claims for any other reason? They deny your coverage. And this is something that could happen. If your insurer denies coverage, they should have specific policy language in your policy that they're relying on to deny you that coverage. What you should do is just ask your insurer for that policy language that they're relying on, and they should give it over to you. And at that point, you should just read through the language that they're relying on. And if you believe you should still be covered, you should be compensated, or if you're still not sure why they've denied your claim, then it would probably be a good idea to seek legal help with one of the resources that we have, just to make sure that everything's going above board. Next slide, please. So that would bring us into step 6, the final step, which is the settlement. And one thing I can say about the settlement, cannot stress this enough, that you are not required to agree to the first settlement amount that your insurer offers you, especially if you believe that the settlement does not fully compensate you for your loss. So what that means is that settlement's a negotiation. Whatever the insurer comes with to the table the first time is certainly not the number that you have to stick to. You're free to go back and forth, and we recommend that you do, to try to get to a number that can fully compensate you for your loss. And if you and your insurer just fundamentally disagree about either the value of your property, the amount of the loss, then you do have the right to have a third party resolve that conflict through a process that's called an appraisal. Now, in an appraisal, what happens is the insurer will hire an appraiser and you will hire an appraiser, and they will both go to the property, determine the value of the loss, determine the value of the property, and hopefully they'll be able to come together and come to a number for your settlement. They'll come to a number of the damage. And if they come to that number and they can agree, then that's the number. But if they're unable to agree, then an independent umpire will be selected, which is basically just a third appraiser. They'll go out there. They're not associated with either you or the insurance company. They're independent. They'll go out to the property, and whatever number that they come to for the damage is the final number. So the appraisal, what it does is it levels the playing field between you and your insurer. If there's a difference in negotiating power, it levels that to where you have an appraiser that's representing you, and they have an appraiser that's representing them. So it makes it a more level playing field. It can help you hopefully raise that level of the settlement and get something that can fully compensate you for your loss and get you back into business. Next slide, please. So another question that might come up is, what if my insurer gives me a low settlement offer because they say I'm underinsured? So it is true that in some cases, if you don't have a high enough coverage limit, that can reduce the amount that you're allowed to recover from your insurer. We don't think that this will be the case with very many of you. But again, if it is, if your insurer comes back to you and says that you're underinsured and that's the reason for your low settlement, you should find a copy of your policy, ask them for where the language is that shows that you're underinsured, and then take that to one of the resources that we're going to show you here in just a little bit and try to get some legal help just to make sure that everything is right there. Next slide, please. So I've been promising some legal resources for quite some time now. So what we have here are some resources that can help you with just insurance coverage issues. Your insurer denies your coverage. They say you're underinsured, that sort of thing. These are some resources that can help you. Peter Doely is here with Maslon, so he can probably talk about their pro bono representation if anyone has questions about that. And then these are two other good resources that you can look to online. You have this slide deck, so you have the links. And if you feel like you need help, then you can check these links out for insurance coverage issues.
Peter, is there anything you wanted to tell us, since we have the slide up now, about Maslon's pro bono efforts and or the Insurance Law Clinic?
Sure, I can touch on both those. So, in the wake of the happenings in the last few weeks, our firm has, depending on how you count them, maybe 5 or 10 attorneys that are devoted basically full time to representing policyholders. So are in insurance disputes and trying to get recoveries for them. So we put our heads together and said, how can we help? And it's still a work in progress. Some of this is coming to presentations like this, distributing some high level information. We know that business owners in this community are hardworking, smart people, and maybe they just need some high-level direction to be able to go out and interact with their insurance companies and get some recovery here. So part of it is information disbursement based on our knowledge. Some of it, we are doing some pro bono representation, small businesses, individuals that are affected by this. You are welcome to contact me or any of the other insurance attorneys that are listed in the link here, Margot Brownell, Brian Freeman, and we're providing a representation. Sometimes it's just answering a few questions. Hey, can you look at my policy? I want to know if I can maybe get paid for this. Sometimes it's do I have any coverage? Do I have a policy that's in effect? And we can answer those relatively quickly. I will say that by and large, insurers have been pretty cooperative with their insureds that we've seen thus far. Granted, a lot will shake out in the next few months, seeing how aggressively they are trying to take lower numbers on valuations, or whether they're trying to press any exclusions. As Ian mentioned, we think that in most cases, there's going to be pretty clear coverage here. But maybe insurers will take a different position, and there are a whole variety of insurance policies with some pretty skinny coverage, some very robust coverage. So we'll be able to check that out. In addition to my day job as an attorney with the Maslon Law Firm, I do co-teach the Insurance Law Clinic. And these would be great cases for the insurance law clinic if there are any issues that come up with the insurer, or even putting together claims. The insurance law clinic would be happy to take a look at them. One practical limitation there, I will say, is that like Emily's clinic, we run on an academic year, so we are fully staffed starting in September. Right now, we are very, very leanly staffed and not accepting new cases right now. But depending on how things shake out over the next few months, if you have issues in September, we would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great. So Mike, if you want to go to the next slide, and I will just, if it's okay with you, Ian, this is one that I can tag in on. So the next couple of slides have resources that are just sort of general business resources. I will mention, I'm mindful of our time here, but the Business Law Clinic works with small businesses to do more sort of forward-looking work, right? So we're not typically the place to go with claims or conflicts. But to the extent that you're rebuilding and you want to take a look at your contracts to make sure that everything's solid there, if you have questions about workers, independent contractors or employees, if you have questions about your intellectual property, filing trademarks, or how your business is structured, you want to talk about, the partners that you run your business with, all of those types of things certainly fall within the Business Law Clinic sphere. So go ahead and reach out to me. That's my direct email address. If you have any questions about that, we also do some more limited advising work with small businesses this summer as well. So feel free to reach out anytime. And then the remainder of the resources, we don't need to go through them, I don't think, Ian, one by one. The idea here is just a lot of times small businesses can get great information from talking to other small businesses who are going through the same things, right? Who have already been kind of on this road and on this path trying to sort it all out. So if you're not already connected with kind of a robust small business community, other folks who are doing work similar to yours, now's a really good time to just reach out and get connected. And there are lots of resources in our community, lots of business development organizations, some of them are listed here, who are also great resources and have typically no cost consultations that they're willing to do with small businesses anytime. So it is 10:01. I did want to just check in with Mike. Mike, is it okay if we take 2 or 3 minutes to wrap up, or did we have a hard stop at 10?
No, we can go ahead and finish up.
Okay, then great. I just wanted to check in with Professor Schwarcz one more time and just see, Dan, was there anything else that you wanted to make sure to add before we wrapped things up?
I was muted. No, I think we've covered things pretty well. I don't have anything to add right now.
Okay, fantastic. So we have one comment and one question here in the chat bar. The comment says, I actually had good luck calling the insurer and getting a different representative who gave me a much better settlement offer. That's fantastic. A lot of this is that kind of hard work where you just have to stay with it kind of again and again and advocate for yourself. So that's really great to hear. The question says, could some of these tactics and suggestions also be used with personal injury cases? And I know we're kind of focused on business insurance here. I don't know, Professor Schwarcz or Peter, if either of you have sort of any thoughts on the general scheme of what we've talked about, vis-a-vis personal injury.
I can talk about that just very briefly. I'll say that this obviously the particulars of what we were talking about here about documenting like what your losses are going to look like, and particular coverages, what may be covered, what may not be covered, and steps that you're going to be taking to preserve property and things like that. We're particular to commercial property liability insurance, but generally speaking, so these obligations, well, it's a large question, because in some ways this is going to be, personal injury is going to be a little bit different because you'll probably be making a claim on a liability on someone else's insurance, someone else, or there's a couple ways that you could do it. Either there's a physical loss that someone else caused or that was caused by you. And if someone else caused it, you're gonna be dealing with someone else's insurance company. So the dynamics are a little bit different there, but a lot of the general advice about cooperation, about gathering information, about building your case and making it easy for them will be the same. You will have to make a claim against someone else who then would tender it to their insurance company. And so you would have a third actor in there that you will be dealing with, which complicates things quite a bit. But some of the general principles about best practices of proving up your case and being your own advocate would certainly be true. I don't know if Professor Schwarcz has anything to add there.
You know, I guess the one thing I would add that sort of may tie this question together with some of what we've talked about before is there is the possibility of potential disputes with tenants and landlords relating to some of this riot caused damage. And so that's one context in which you could see personal injury suits or tort suits, not for damage, not for bodily injury, but for property damage. So an example here might be, what if you have a lease and the lease says that the landlord is supposed to make the property available to you for the year, and now the property has been destroyed, and so the landlord is in breach of the lease. So there might actually be some potential legal issues surrounding those types of disputes, and it might actually even be the case that the landlord's liability insurer could potentially be willing or able or required to contribute to a settlement if there's a breach of the lease. So to the extent you are in a situation where it's not your property that was destroyed, at least the physical building, but it was your landlord's, but that has adversely affected your business, and there's potentially a breach of the lease agreement on the part of your landlord, it might be worth investigating that issue.
Emily, you're muted right now.
Thank you. All of the attendees have the PDF of the PowerPoint, so you have the list of resources. They're just community resources other than the business law and insurance law clinic, which are specifically related to the University of Minnesota. So giving that we're a few minutes over, Mike, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you after I say a final thank you to Peter and to Professor Schwarcz and to Sam and Ian. It was really excellent to have you all here today. We really appreciated the information. Back to you, Mike.
Yes, thank you. And for those of you who are still online, just a reminder that Minnesota has great SBA resource partners around the state to help you navigate other business programs. They can help small business owners prepare and understand financial statements, as well as provide general business advice. There are 9 small business development centers that cover all corners of the state. SCORE has chapters scattered around with mentors ready to help. There are 3 women's business centers in the Twin Cities, Duluth, and Little Falls that cover much of the state. And finally, there are the Regional Veterans Business Outreach Center that can connect veterans with veteran-specific resources. Again, we are working hard to get you accurate information about all SBA programs. The best way to get real-time information is to sign up for our newsletter at sba.gov/updates. Please type in your zip code to get local information and resources. We hope that you find this information helpful as you maneuver through our programs, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.